Coming up here in just about 13 days. And I know it's 13 days because they have reminded me every single day of how many days it will be my daughter's birthday. For my beautiful, amazing children, Robin and Adrian. They look forward to this day every single year. I mean, like most of us, well, maybe used to in some cases. As the number gets higher, maybe you look a little less forward to it every year. I don't know how you feel about that, but you know, they've been kind of getting things together and getting ready to go for their birthday. They've been compiling their birthday list, which I think for Adrian has now gotten to page 4. They're just kind of slowly figuring out the things that they want to ask for their birthday and the things that they're wanting to do and who all's going to be at their party and all those things. And they've gotten, as they're putting their list together, they've gotten pretty clever. Because they share a birthday, they kind of know that they don't both need to ask for the same thing. So I'll hear them in the other room as they're getting things together saying things like, well, Sissy, don't ask for that. I'm going to ask for that. We'll just share it. It'll be fine. Or my personal favorite, they said this one this week, if you ask for this doll, I'll ask for her sister, and that way we'll have both. I mean, they've kind of put it all together, haven't they? It's kind of fun to watch them get excited for their birthday because it reminds me as a kid whenever I would get excited for my own birthday and think about the things that maybe I was going to get for my birthday. But there's always those one things that you really hope you don't get for your birthday. And no, I'm not talking about clothes. I'm talking about knockoff brand toys. You know what I'm talking about there? The things that kind of look like what it is that you want, but they're just not quite the right thing. Like for me growing up, I always wanted to get a brand new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle figure. One thing I wasn't looking forward to getting was a New Age Ninja Tortoise. We have a picture of it right here. You can tell it's a tortoise because across its chest it says tortoise. Somebody really put forth this foresight there. Anyway, maybe if you collected Star Wars action figures, you were hoping to complete your collection, and instead you were met with, well, these monstrosities. You may not be able to see it real well, but that one on the right there, that's not Yoda, that's the wise puppet, everybody's favorite character from Star Wars, right? If you're a gamer, I sincerely doubt that you were hoping to get your hands on the latest Super Mariano. Maybe you weren't looking forward to that. I mean, though I will give knockoff brands this. Sometimes they can save you some time and maybe a little bit of money because they might combine things together. Like if your kid likes Pokemon and SpongeBob SquarePants, you can just buy them this thing. Truth be told, I have no idea what that is. I don't know why it's eating a watermelon. And the more I've looked at it, the more confused I get by it. Anyway, but if all else fails, if everything else just won't work and you can't figure out what to get your kid, you can always count on Old Reliable, the hero that everybody loves, the one in the blue suit with the red cape, everybody's favorite superhero, Special Man. He's special. Not quite as fast as a speeding bullet, but pretty close. The idea of knockoff toys and stuff like that, or knockoff things, it doesn't really stick to the toy aisle, though. We know this to be the case. You can find knockoff brand things all over the place whenever you're throughout the store. It's not difficult to find people trying to make a buck, trying to pass themselves off as something that they just aren't. We can see it in the clothing section with brands like Neck or Adidas. Or if you don't find something in your size that you like here, you can always try my personal favorite knockoff brand because at least, these folks are being honest. You can buy some lies. I appreciate the honesty there. If you start to get hungry, maybe you can grab some Prongles or even some Legs chips. I saw this yesterday as I was putting this all together and stuff, the tagline for Prongles. You know, in Pringles, it's once you pop, you can't stop. In Prongles, it's once you pop, that's great. Somebody thought a long time about that particular slogan. Anyway, if you want something sweet, maybe you could break yourself off a piece of that Kit-Ker bar. You know, it's close. Once you've eaten all this stuff, you can wash it down with some nice, cold, refreshing bottle of Mountain View. If you wanted to take things a step further, maybe you wanted to go out to eat your dinner, that's fine too. You can always hit restaurants like Donkey Donuts or KLC. And no, before you can ever even ask, I have no idea what the L stands for. It's bothered me all week. What is the L? The best I can come up with is it's Kentucky Like Chicken. It's like it. Maybe it's Kentucky adjacent. Maybe it's from Tennessee instead. Anyway, I thought that was funny. But, when all else fails, you can always go and get a nice hot cup of pumpkin spice flavored coffee at your local Sunbucks Coffee. There's knockoff brands all over the place. No matter where you go, you can find something that is trying so hard to make you think it's the real thing, to make you think it's that real article. There's even, in fact, some knockoff religious portraits that have fooled a lot of people. Things that we've seen that kind of look like they might be Jesus, but they're not quite. You may have seen every now and again on your social media feed this picture of Jesus. I've seen this a few different times. I've seen it prop up in people's Facebook feeds or Instagrams even and stuff like that, and they'll almost always have the caption with something that's very sweet and heartfelt, like, I'm not ashamed to have Jesus on my feed, or I'm unashamed of him. Or maybe you'll see it with the caption that says something like, my followers will like and share this picture. I'm sorry, that's not how blessings work, if that's you. But there's a bigger problem with this particular portrait of Jesus. That's not Jesus. In fact, this picture has never tried to present itself as Jesus. This is, in fact, the actor Ewan McGregor playing Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi in the Star Wars series. But it's fooled so many different people. It's made people think that this must be a picture of Jesus because this has so many qualities that we expect to see from Jesus. Maybe it looks similar to other portraits that we've seen of Jesus. Somewhere, someone along the way gave us the idea that this is what Jesus looks like. And I think if we really begin to examine that a little bit, maybe the reason why so many people have been fooled by this is because there are far too many people who have not encountered the real, authentic Jesus. Somewhere along the way, somebody presented Jesus as something like that, but instead it's just a knockoff. They've not seen the real and authentic Jesus. They've been sold a knockoff. Unfortunately, for far too many people, this has been their experience within the church. They've come to the church hoping to find Jesus, hoping to find his grace and his love and his mercy and his peace, only to be sold a Jesus that has an agenda or some kind of political stance, or they've been sold a warm, fuzzy feeling, but not the genuine article. They've come to the church hoping to find Jesus, and instead, they've seen so many different things that don't line up with the Jesus found in Scripture. They've seen churches who do and say things that go so far against Jesus that it almost feels like that church is actively going against Jesus, like it's some sort of a fight between the church versus Jesus. Whole hordes of people have left the church because when they looked closer at the Jesus that was being presented to them, they realized it was a knockoff, that it was some sort of twisted version of Jesus, or some version of Jesus that wasn't him at all, but trying to pass itself off as that. Sometimes, frankly, bluntly, we as the church, we have a set of priorities that are not in line with that of Jesus. And we've done a really good job of trying to pass them off like they do. In fact, this has been true of the very first followers of Jesus. It's something that's plagued the church since the very beginning, actually since even before Jesus left. While we might hold the disciples of Jesus up on a pedestal, we might look at them as being these amazing pillars of faith, these guys who have just gone and lived out their faith in ways that you and I could only ever dream of. Sometimes we may even hold them up to the same level or pretty darn close to the level that we hold Jesus. I'm here to remind you, they were just men. They were human beings. They made mistakes. And sometimes, even those who followed him closest didn't share the same priorities or values that Jesus did. We see it in our text today in Luke chapter 9, verses 51 through 56. Go ahead and turn there now. Luke 9, verses 51 to 56. As you're getting there, though, I want to tell you that this is one of those blink and you miss it sort of stories that are kind of all over the Gospels. I mean, if you really think about it, the Gospels as 4 books of Jesus, they're trying to condense at least 3 years of a man's life, and that's hard to do in just a few chapters. So there's going to be those stories that maybe we just kind of come across and we don't completely grasp it, but we're too busy moving on to the next thing, and this may be that story for you. If you've read the Gospel of Luke, there's a pretty good chance you've never really examined the story, or at the very least, you've never thought that hard about it. But we see it in Luke chapter 51, verses 56. Let's read it together. It says, "When the days were coming to a close for him to be taken up, he determined to journey to Jerusalem. He sent messengers ahead of himself on the way. They entered a village of the Samaritans to make preparations for him. But they did not welcome him, because he determined to journey to Jerusalem. When the disciples, James and John, saw this, they said, 'Lord, do you want us to call down fire from heaven to consume them?' But he turned and rebuked them, and they went on to another village." This text kind of picks things up for Jesus as he's beginning to make his way to Jerusalem. Luke seems to allude here that this is the journey to Jerusalem, that Jesus is making his way there to the cross. But we know that this must have been he must have gone completely off the main roads and stuff like that, because everything that follows this, there are so many things that happen between this particular story and when Jesus finally makes it to Jerusalem in the Gospel of Luke. He kind of goes all over the map in Israel. And as they're continuing on this journey, we know that Jesus is thinking about the cross. We know this because just a few verses ahead, in verses 43 to 45, Jesus, for the second time, tells his disciples what's going on ahead of them, of what they can expect when they make their way to Jerusalem. We know that it was on his heart. We know that he is going there to die. But of course, the disciples don't completely get that. All they really know for sure is that they're making their way to Jerusalem with Jesus, and that this is a really important trip for him. But I want to also remind you of a couple things that happened a little bit before this. A couple things that we've spent some time this year really talking about. This takes place after 2 major events that I want you to keep in the back of your mind. The first is that this happens after Peter has confidently proclaimed that Jesus is the Christ. He has said wholeheartedly and unashamedly, "You are the Messiah." This also takes place after the events of what we call the Transfiguration, when Jesus goes upon the mountain and he encounters Moses and Elijah, and he is transformed before 3 of his disciples. That's going to be important for you to remember here in just a few minutes, but I wanted to remind you of that, just to keep that in the back of your mind. As these guys are making this journey, as Jesus and his disciples are walking along and they're trying to make their way to Jerusalem, they're kind of noticing that, you know what, my eyes are getting kind of heavy. Maybe they're walking a little swayedly. They're kind of veering over into the median a little bit of the road. They're about to knock head on with somebody else. I thought this was funny, but that's fine. They kind of get that decision that you make whenever you've been traveling for a long period of time. You know what, I need to pull over. I need to rest. I need to stop. Maybe I need to catch a motel and get a night's sleep. But as they're walking along, they have these guys who go on ahead of them. And so they tell them to go ahead to this next village, this village in Samaria, and tell them that we're coming. Now, we've talked a little bit about how the Jews and the Samaritans, a little bit about that relationship. We know that Jews typically didn't like Samaritans. And maybe you remember exactly why, maybe you don't. I'm here to give you a quick refresher. We're going to just kind of take a quick side road here. When the Jews were led into Babylon for exile, there was a remnant of the Jews that remained in Israel. And that particular area became very hostile. It's still hostile to this day, in fact. A lot of invading countries would come in, and because of these new people entering into the nation of Israel, these Israelites oftentimes married people who were not Jewish. As a result of these relationships, the people who come into this, they introduce their new spouses to their religions and to their practices and to their gods. And that's kind of a natural byproduct that created this hybrid religion of Judaism mixed with paganism. And when the Jews that had been taken away from Babylon were allowed to go back home, they came back home and they found these people practicing a faith that was against what Moses had taught them. And they rejected them completely. They began to call them Samaritans. They designated a little area in Israel that was just for them. And They made them the butt of their jokes. They ridiculed them in public. They wouldn't be seen talking to them unless there was money to be made. Jews did not like Samaritans. And while we've talked about that side of this relationship, we haven't really looked at it from the other side of this. Right? I'm going to throw out a guess that if somebody treated you the way that Jews treated Samaritans, your opinion of that person is probably not going to be that high. Jews hated Samaritans, and so in turn, Samaritans hated Jews. Again, the only time that they would try to have any sort of contact with any sort of natural-born Hebrew people was if there was a profit to be made off of it. And so when Jesus comes into this town, or as he's getting ready to enter into this village, and he sends his messengers on ahead of him to say, hey, make preparations because Jesus is coming, they say no. They don't roll out the red carpet. They don't welcome him with a parade. Instead, they tell him, you're going to have to find someplace else to go. But Luke makes a really important distinction that I think we need to know about. In verse 53, Luke tells us that they did not welcome him because he determined to journey to Jerusalem. Understand, this town is not rejecting Jesus because he is Jewish. They're rejecting Jesus because he's going to the heart of the Jewish people. He's determined, no matter what, he's going to make his way to Jerusalem. And so they're not letting him pass through their town. They're not letting him stay and rest while he's in the area. Maybe I'm oversimplifying it here, but in my mind, I kind of equate this as somebody who's trying to make their way to Bloomington, not being allowed to pass through West Lafayette. It seems a little silly to me that because of where he's ultimately going, this town tells him you cannot come through here. It's annoying. Maybe on some level even it's a little bit hurtful. But I don't know, maybe it's just me. In my mind, I think, well, we just move on to the next town, right? We can stay awake a little bit longer. We can keep upright a little bit longer here to make it to the next town and be able to stop and rest there. They don't want us to go there. Yeah, they could have been nicer about the way that they said it. They could have given us a better reason than because you're going to Jerusalem, we don't want you here. I might, if I'm being really honest, go so far as maybe trashing them a little bit online when I get to wherever it is I'm going. Talking about what a terrible town this is and nobody should ever go. Ironically enough, like Bloomington. No, I'm just kidding. Go Boilers. Can we just say that this? I know this is an aside here, but I'm pretty sure that a lot of the officials yesterday for the Purdue football game were living in South Bend because, man, they blew a whole bunch of calls there. I'm over it. We're good. Anyway, but that's about as extreme as I might go. I might trash them a little bit online. I might tell my friends not to go visit them. That's about as far as I'm willing to go. But James and John, they come up with a whopper of a solution here. At the end of verse 54, they say to Jesus, Lord, do you want us to call down fire from heaven to consume them? Whoa! That is an awfully extreme reaction to have here, don't you think? They don't want us to go there? Well, let's watch them burn. How in the world did they think that this was a good idea? How did they... Yeah, sure, we've all been rejected by people, and we've been hurt by that. We maybe even gotten angry about it, but we're not exactly calling for the Sodom and Gomorrah treatment, are we? And yet to James and John, this is what we have to do. You have to ask the obvious. What were they thinking? How could they possibly assume that this was the solution that was going to be the thing that was going to turn things around? How in the world would they jump to this kind of problem solving? But it's here I want to point out a couple of things to you. First off, and this is really simple, James and John had a little bit of a reputation before they ever even met Jesus. And it kind of comes up from time to time. We see it pop up here and there, but they had a little nickname. We're not going to dive too deep into their reputation because we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about it next week. That's a spoiler alert, I'm sorry. But James and John had a nickname that popped up from time to time, and that nickname was the Sons of Thunder, which is, in my mind at least, a really great tag team pro wrestling name. But there's a reason why they had that reputation. Nicknames are most of the time earned. And their nickname was the Sons of Thunder. It implies at least a little bit about their nature as human beings and who they were before they met Jesus. But secondly, I want to remind you of what I just reminded you of a few minutes ago. This whole event takes place not long after those two major events in Scripture that we just mentioned. When Peter proudly proclaimed that Jesus is the Christ, James and John were right there. In fact, all 12 of the disciples were right there when Peter made that declaration, and I'm willing to bet that James and John were very emphatically nodding in agreement. Yes, he is the Christ. They were there when Peter made that declaration. They were there when they heard Jesus telling them, hey, don't tell anybody about that. And if there was any doubt in their minds, well, then the transfiguration must have changed that, because I said Jesus took 3 disciples up on that mountaintop. We know Peter was there. The other 2 were James and John. If there was any doubt in their minds that Jesus was the Messiah in that particular moment, as they watched their master and their friend and their teacher transformed and having a conversation with Moses and Elijah, 2 men who'd been dead for centuries, any doubt was removed. They knew Jesus was the Christ, and so when they hear that this little village in Samaria wants to reject them, they take it personally. Don't they know who he is? They should be honored to have him come and stay in their village. How could they possibly say no to Jesus? He's the Son of God. And so they do what we would do in that situation. They become indignant. They become angry. They become vengeful. And I'm guessing that these 2 thought Jesus must feel the same as us. They had to assume in that particular moment that Jesus agreed with them, because why else would you vocalize that? Why would you present that as the solution to Jesus? James and John did something that you and I, frankly, we do far too often. They assumed that Jesus felt the same as them. They assumed that Jesus must feel that this is the right course of action. They made that assumption that because they felt anger and they felt indignity and they felt, let's call it what it is, hatred, Jesus must feel the same. And Jesus does indeed get upset, but not at the village. No, Jesus instead, he gets upset at James and John. We can't miss this. In a moment where Jesus gets upset, he doesn't get upset at these people who've wronged him. Instead, he gets upset at the followers who think that they're right. Verse 55 actually says that Jesus turned and rebuked them. That's a word that we come across in Scripture quite often, the word rebuke. And we kind of know that it means something negative, but understand the word rebuke is a huge word. It is a big deal. This is not just Jesus softly telling them that they're wrong and trying to correct them in a gentle way. James and John got chewed out. There's a good chance that Jesus was in their face, pointing that finger, wagging at them, with spittle flying in their faces. He's so angry at them. James and John didn't just face correction. They got to see Jesus mad. I can't imagine how that must have been like for them. At that point in time, they felt so small. Jesus is giving them heavy influence. Rebuke implies yelling at them. It implies strong correction. He makes it abundantly clear to these 2 disciples that he loves that they are wrong, and that their priorities and their values are not the same as his. These 2 disciples had this mindset that was so far removed from Jesus, and it wasn't Jesus who needed to change here. James and John in this moment did exactly what far too many of us do, what far too many Christians do. They projected their own values and their own feelings and their own priorities onto Jesus. They felt like because we're followers of Jesus and Jesus has been rejected here that we're going to get angry about it. And that's not how Jesus felt. We have a tendency to project our own things onto Jesus, our own junk onto Jesus, and assume that he feels the same way as us. We seek to make Jesus more like us instead of examining our own hearts and changing our perspective to better match his. This is something that happens all over the place in the church today. It is what has led to us presenting a knockoff version of Jesus. Because we project all manner of different things that we value or we prioritize onto him. And we present that as the true, definitive Jesus. But far too often, that is not the value and the priority of Jesus. Far too often, this Jesus that we display to the world around us is so very far removed from the Jesus found in the Gospels. We make the assumption that if something upsets us or offends us or makes us uncomfortable, well, then it must do the same thing to Jesus. It must be how he feels. The end result of this line of thinking has been that the church that is meant to reflect Jesus to the world around us has instead built a reputation. The church that is meant to be known for the love and the grace and the mercy of Jesus is instead known for what we're against, or who we vote for, or what our priorities are, no matter how messed up they may be. Frankly, when the church values and priorities are different than the values and the priorities of Jesus, it's not Jesus who needs to change. There are countless amounts of people who have come to the church, many of which have come at their most desperate hour, come at times when they felt like they had nowhere else to turn, and they were seeking to find love and grace, only to be sold a knockoff brand of Jesus that considers a personal agenda more important, or a political stance, or even hates. But that is not the Jesus of Scripture. We as the church have been guilty of adding to the pain of people we were meant to heal because we've tried to sell them a knockoff version of Jesus. Understand, folks, very simply, this must change. This has to change. We cannot present Jesus as anything other than the Jesus that we find in Scripture. We have to stop projecting our own thoughts and our own insecurities and our own whatever onto Jesus and assume that that makes Jesus who he really is. The whole purpose of the church is to reflect Jesus, not the American Jesus, not the Jesus that we've made up, not the white Jesus, but Jesus, found in Scripture, whose immediate reaction to everyone he encountered, regardless as to what was going on in their lives, regardless as to ways that they were living, regardless as to what their reputation in town was, his response was to love. Yeah, he corrected them. Understand, he did not tolerate sin. I'm not standing here and proposing that we tolerate sin. But people don't change because we yell at them. People don't change because we threaten them. People change because we love them. Because we care about them. Because that's Jesus. As the church, man, we got to stop fighting against Jesus. We got to stop presenting a Jesus that is different. We have to stop trying to make Jesus in our image and instead seek to change our image into that of Jesus. That's the whole point of what we're doing here, folks. The whole point of being a follower of Jesus is to become more like Jesus. Do you understand that the name Christian was meant as an insult when it first came out? When the first church was going around and they were doing everything they could to be like Jesus, people said, well, look at those Christians. The term Christian actually translates to little Christ. We're making fun of them. And we took ownership of that because you know what? We were looking like Jesus. But somewhere along the way, we've lost that. That's probably because somewhere along the way, we got sold a knockoff version of Jesus that we have tried to pass on instead of seeking the real thing. The church, in every conceivable way, needs to look to shift our values to that of Jesus. Because he ain't going to change. Hebrews 13:8 says that Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Understand something, and please understand that I understand the weight of what I'm telling you here. But if there is any church that preaches and practices things that stand against what Jesus preached and practiced, then it is not the church that Jesus came to establish. If anybody stands up here and proclaims that Jesus believes this or Jesus wants us to whatever, and we hold that up against Scripture and it does not measure up, that person is not representing Jesus. They're trying to sell you a knockoff.